Okay, Chodesh Tov, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight at quite short notice. We originally wanted to do, just a few people together, and then we thought, we might as well open it up and we'll record it, and for people who might not be able to make it tonight. And I'm sure, everyone's going to find this interesting. I apologize, by the way, if you hear there's fireworks happening now, because in England, it's on the 5th of November, it's Guy Fawkes, also someone from the 1600s, where they commemorate, he wanted to blow up Parliament, but we'll be commemorating someone else from the 1600s, whose Nachala is tonight, the 1st of Kislev of the 5448, November 1687. Before I introduce Walter, who will give us background, and I think we're going to jump into an excerpt of Orobio, I wanted to share just a very brief introduction as to, why we have this special Chabura, marking the Nachala of this great person. As you all know, one of the prime objectives of the Chabura is to raise awareness of a particular approach, a Sephardic approach that was not threatened by philosophy, by science and foreign ideas. It stood firm when it had to, as Orobio did when it came to Spinozaist thought and that type of atheism. But it also embraced what was fitting and beneficial from the outside world. And it's an approach that has sometimes, been dismissed and is very much sidelined and forgotten sometimes in the mainstream, outside the walls of academia. But we strongly believe that it's an approach much needed today for the modern thinking Jew, and everyone, to be honest, of the 21st century. So it's really vital that we reconnect with this past and heritage and draw ideas and inspiration from it. I think one of the offshoots of the classic Sephardim and of Spain was obviously the Western Sephardim who set up shop in Holland and Italy, Britain, and a few places. And as some of you know, the Chabura is affiliated with the Spanish Portuguese, Montefiore, who are, of course, affiliated to the Western Sephardim, who are integral components of it, really, of this tradition. So we want to shed light on these communities. We're going to have more lectures on that, on the culture, on, in particular, the Chachamim, their thinking and teachings, which we think have not been given enough, exposure. Which takes me tonight to our special guest, Walter Hilliger, who I think it's fair to say shares our vision and has made it his mission to translate many of these works from Judeo-Spanish and Latin into modern Spanish and English, and making it accessible to all of us and the wider public. So welcome, Walter. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and the spotlight is yours.
Thank you very much, Avi, for the invitation and for the honor to host the anniversary of Isaac Orobio. We have so many books of this Sephardic tradition, which are part of a culture that belong to a period of the Renaissance in Europe, but not only Renaissance, also to the medieval culture in Europe, and it's very important to see it in a global sense. This is the gravestone with the memorial inscription, the Portuguese Jewish cemetery in Hilliger near Amsterdam. This is a translation. Isaac lives in heaven. This stone marks the grave of a man of worth, a man still living who gave light to the world. For wisdom is his name, famous in every corner of it, namely a skilled physician, Isaac Orobio de Castro, whose spirit went up on high on the first day of the month of Kislev, year 5448. May his soul be bound in the bond of life. This is a translation. This is from Joseph Kaplan's biography, and he wrote a very extensive biography. I think it was published in 1989. He was born as Baltasar Alvarez in Braganza. He didn't have the name yet of Isaac Orobio de Castro. That came only later. And he was registered as a medicine student in Osuna in Andalusia, where he learned the traditional curriculum of doctors and of medical students back then. This is interesting because in the university he learned the trivium, which is the three arts, medieval arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. This is very unusual today because we wouldn't think today that doctors need to study a language and how to communicate, but this was very important at the time. So this is something that he shared later with the community in Amsterdam, particularly with Rabbi Rafael de Aguilar. We're going to talk about him soon. In 1637, he wrote a poem, and for the first time he signed under the name of Orobio. And in 1649, he became a professor of medicine in Sevilla, also in Andalusia. He was someone who could write in Latin, which is amazing. But it was very common for students back then because it was the language of knowledge and erudition. It's interesting because as many great men, he suffered a lot of slander and calumny. So he spent at least 2 years in a dungeon. He was again condemned by the Inquisition to perpetual confinement. I mean, that was like life prison. We don't have many details about it, but there were still slander and calumnies that came up to the whole hierarchy of the clerical tribunal. And this is when he decided to live with his family. Before he came to Toulouse, he got some connections in Saint-Esprit, Jewish connections there, and he became professor of surgery and pharmacology in Toulouse. He stayed there until for 2 or 3 years. So from 1659 until 1662. When he finally went to settle into the Netherlands, where Balthasar became Isaac, and his wife Isabel became finally Esther. I was surprised when I read his biography by Joseph Kaplan, who is he's a great scholar. Joseph Kaplan consulted many books and manuscripts and copies and transcriptions of Isaac Orobio. And I was surprised because he missed the most important part in France. He's skeptical that Isaac Orobio met the king of France, because the king of France, Louis XIV, Roi Soleil, he was generally in the north. Isaac Orobio never went to Paris, or maybe he visited Paris, but it was unlikely that he met the king in Paris. The 14th of October, 1659, the king, Louis XIV, Roi Soleil, the Sun King, he came to the south of France, and he came to the Pyrenees to negotiate a peace agreement with Spain. And the king of France spent 2 years in the south. And these are the 2 years that Isaac Orobio was also in the south. So he was there at the right time and the right place. And here we see the images of the people in Toulouse. 15,000 people and 8,000 horses came with him. I mean, that's a lot of people for a city that at the time hosted 40,000 people. So there he met Louis XIV, Roi Soleil. He met Maria Teresa of Spain, who was the daughter of the daughter of the king, and they got married. Isaac Orobio, he was the doctor of the king, I mean, when he visited there. So I think that he took care of Maria Teresa, and he took care of the king and of all the people. I cannot imagine the organization that they had to provide for hosting all these, the visit of the king and all these people. And this is the palace. This is where Isaac Orobio worked at that time. And we also see below the home of the king in San Gian de Lusa, where he spent time with the queen, and probably Isaac Robio visited that place too. Back then in the south, Isaac Robio started his apologetics, as they call him today. There he started writing the Prevenciones Divinas contra la Idolatría de las Gentes, which is can be translated as divine warnings against the idolatries of the peoples. In his book, Prevenciones Divinas, he really did an exegesis, and he found in the Jewish text, and he consulted with Rabbi Aguilar, all the passages and texts that warn Jews against the future flaws, irrational flaws that are proposed in Christian religion. Here I put a page of the chapter 2 of Prevenciones. It says, capítulo 2, Prevención a Israel contra la encarnación del cristianismo, against incarnation of Christianity. I read it and then I translate. Dijo más el Señor a su amado pueblo con la ocasión en que nuestro maestro Mosé quiso ver su divina gloria y no verá al hombre y vivirá, que es decir, ninguno de los vivientes puede ver con los ojos de la materialidad mi ser infinito. He's talking about this passage of Exodus where Moses was the most beloved man to God, and God tells to him, no man can see me and live. And this is against the material idea, the materialistic idea of God. We see this a lot in Maimonides, and Maimonides also discusses in the guide for the perplexed against this idea of giving an image or delimiting the idea of God and the divine. And Isaac Orobio also developed this topic in his Prevenciones Divinas. Here I prepared an image. This is from Google Ngrams, and here we see that the word Dios or God is the most frequent word in the corpus of human books still today, especially at the time of the Enlightenment, at the Age of Reason. So in the Age of Reason, between the 17th and 18th century, reality studied, which is metaphysics, to give it meaning, which is epistemology, to reach an objective truth of being, which is ontology, of which God is the source. And the frequency of God in books reached its climax in the Century of Light. This is, I'm showing this to debunk the idea, the modern idea, that the Renaissance was an atheistic time. I mean, there's a popular idea that it was atheistic or atheistic time. And in the age of reason, people were really immersed into God in books and in philosophy, and it was the most important topic. This is so since the times of Greek philosophy. The Renaissance is in some way a restoration of Greek or Greco-Roman European ideas that were given a new life through scholastic philosophy, where we see Anselm and the ontological argument. Isaac Orobio could quote, sometimes we see it in his text Aquinas and some Christian scholars. And this is important to mention because someone like Orobio didn't see didn't, in epistemology, which is a study of objective truth, he didn't see a truth separate in distinct disciplines. Today, after we have fragmented all the disciplines in our modern world, we reinvented the idea of interdisciplinary studies. At that time, the studies were already interdisciplinary, and this is interdisciplinary. It's a medieval idea, and it means that something that is true in the sense of Orobio, something that is true in Judaism, is true and must be true also in Christianity, and is also true in philosophy. In science today, we are taught and we are constantly pushed into the idea that the universe is infinite and that there is a void behind. I think this is a common idea today in modern thought, that there is a void and we were deprived of something behind reality. And the thought that Orobio represents, which is a medieval thought, is that behind reality there is no void. Behind reality there is God, and because He's the creator and the infinite creator of the universe and everything we see of reality, and reality is contingent and has a limited time. And this is what we're going to see in his Certamen Philosophicum. I'm going to share two ideas of two chapters from his book. It's a very deep book. It's impossible to share it live in a few minutes. It takes years to digest. But this is related to what I was mentioning. It is in chapter 1, part 1, page 77. The definition 1, this is the definition that he contradicts. These are the definitions based on modern thinking, and Isaac Orobio replies to them. The modern way of thinking is that by necessary being, necessary here is not does not mean necessary in terms of utility or usefulness. It means it doesn't mean necessity in utilitarian terms. It means necessity as something that has to be there as a basis. And this is what I meant, that behind reality there is God, there is no void, there is God. And this is the base, this is what's necessary. It's something that's necessary there, not the void, it's there. And by necessary being is understood the being whose existence is its very essence, or a necessary being that exists essentially. At that time, at the time of Orobio, they started to think that the material world that we see and the reality we see is a necessary being. And this is what Orobio is against to here. He said this definition is true and only suits the supreme all-perfect being, that is God only. Who essentially exists and whose existence is really one with his being. But if he intends to apply this definition to a set of rational creators or to something else, in that case, the definition denies God as the creator of the universe, with the belief that this same universe is as a God, according to Spinoza's atheism. And this is a problem of the materialist paradigm, that by turning the universe into God, after that, where do we put the idea of godliness, this distinct, separate being beyond reality? The problem, and one of the flaws of modern thought and of Spinoza's thought, is that for him everything was one, and he lost the sense of distinction between what is distinct, different, and diverse. And in Orobio's philosophy, these are very clear terms, and we can only understand that there is a God if we know that there is a distinct being separated from us, and not separated from us, but there are two perspectives. It is that I put it into this way in one of the notes. If we have a divine soul, and if we are different from God, different because we have this similitude, which is a divine soul, God is distinct from us, but we are different from Him. So this is the distinction. It's a very thin distinction that we can understand when we get used to the words of Isaac Orobio. In the footnotes, I wrote, God's aseity in scholastic philosophy. Aseity is that when God is one, in scholastic philosophy is a special sort of constant existence by itself and in itself, without causation, by which the necessary being cannot stop existing or stop being. If we think that the universe, as some people think the universe is infinite, it cannot have a beginning. And if the universe had a beginning, I mean, it cannot be God, because God, for an eternal being to be eternal, that being doesn't have a beginning. So these are ideas that are developed in logical terms, and we see that in his writing. Other creators cannot be necessary beings without causation, nor be their own cause, because creators cannot be before and after themselves, and creators are formed and are subject to change. Obviously, this applies to all creations and all creators, but not to that being, omnipresent being, that we call in Hebrew Hamakom, the omnipresence. Point 3, Aristotle in his metaphysics attributes to nature three meanings: the native constitution of something, the set of intrinsic principles of matter and form, and the set of intrinsic qualities and properties of a thing that emanate from its constitution. The renowned statement of Spinoza, Deus sive natura, God or nature, does not suit God, who is not born and cannot be born, although it can be said actively when God makes things to be born. Therefore, Plato called this first definition the nature of things. Augustine divided nature into made and unmade, calling the latter God. The scholastics differentiated it as naturata, created, I mean the nature that is created, and naturante, the creative nature, being God the creative nature, the naturante. And the second definition suits God in giving intrinsically matter and form to things. The third definition of nature is the most used when it's said that God, by his nature, is just omnipotent, etc. However, Spinoza's confusion in simplistic language severed ties with the philosophers that preceded him and with the understanding of nature based on the authorities that Isaac Orobio defends. The idea that we have to keep in mind here is that the modern invention is thinking of nature in general terms. I mean, doing a generalization and saying there is a nature in general. And this is a mistake that scientists do, and we see that everywhere. I mean, this concept, this idea of nature in general, that actually doesn't exist. Maimonides and others explain clearly that there is a particular nature of things. There is a nature of, the example of Maimonides is the nature of fire is heating, and it's heat, that's the nature of fire. There is a specific nature, okay, specific, you have particular, specific, and general. The specific nature is that, for example, specific nature of humans is being rational. Rationality is part of human nature, and then there is a general nature. And Isaac Orobio, David Nieto, Aguilar, Menace Ben Israel, all share this same idea and same thought that there is no nature in general. I mean, this is a modern concept, a very pervasive idol, as David Nieto called it, and it's a very pervasive idea because we see it everywhere. This thing called nature, which doesn't exist. What we find is particular natures, specific natures, and then we find God. And this is the way that the tradition, Sephardic tradition, saw it. In chapter 2, we will finish with the attributes. Definition 2, attributes are qualities whose essences constitute the nature of the thing to which they are qualities. So they are not distinguished from the entity to which they are attributes or qualities. Here, Orobio answers, if this definition is understood of the being that necessarily exists, meaning God, it is inadmissible without a distinction, because there are no qualities in God, who is as a whole a very simple essence without composition. This is also Maimonidean, this is also Saadia Gaon, it's also Gersonides. It's idea of not giving any attributes to God, because attributes are not attributes in God. In medieval language, attributes in God are infinite, because God is infinite, and He cannot have parts. God cannot have components, because it's illogical that if God was composed of something, of which attribute came first, it's nonsensical. So everything what's godliness and what is God is infinite, and the attributes in God are not attributes per se, are called perfections, because they are infinite and they are complete, and they are only one essence. Maybe some people think that what I'm mentioning here about this is maybe far-fetched, or it's, I don't know, it's maybe too philosophical, but when we study and when we are commanded to say and to meditate the Shema Israel, we are commanded to teach His word to our children and to study them and to meditate on them. And it's very simple to meditate Shema Israel in terms of, there is only one God, because that God from them and the other God from the others and the other God from that culture is not God. I mean, that's very simple. What these words meant for Sephardic thinkers was to meditate on the attributes. And this is the teaching of the attributes. That's very old. It started with Aristotle, but we can see it. I think the Hebrew word, there are many words for attributes in Hebrew. The most typical is midot, but there are other words, and we see this in Maimonides, in Saadia Gaon, and in Gersonides. So we see in point 2, qualities are categories of the aspect of a substance that do not exist nor subsist on their own. And all that is God is a constant substance that exists on its own and to which nothing can be added. Qualities are only given to God by analogy and not as meaningful qualities. Qualities are material. We cannot give any qualities to God. That's I think that's clear. We give to the divine essence or necessary entity attributes and quality, not because these various qualities and attributes are found in it, but rather because of the imbecility, in our understanding. Imbecility means ignorance is not such a strong word in Latin. In our understanding that considered it as known in creators when we assign them to God, the infinitely perfect. And if we could know God as it is, we would know only one infinite, indivisible perfection that includes all qualities. Thus, if we conceive these attributes as qualities, it's an error of our limited capacity and a fiction of our understanding. I did my best to render it as readable as possible so that it's possible to relate to the ideas. In the footnotes, I wrote the composition, footnote 1, the composition results from a set of several things, different and distinct from each other, a compound of several parts. This is the opposite of the simple essence of God, that is indivisible. Whether in reality or through reasoning, in action or potentially, nothing can be added to the simple essence nor removed from it. With the exception of supreme attributes or supreme categories, not all attributes considered parts of the essence are essential, as is the particular case of qualities. A creator like man receives the quality of being wise. However, this quality does not represent the essence of being a man. A man without this quality is still a man. Other attributes are essential and are part of the essence, such as being rational or sensitive, or the case of flying birds that receive the attribute of volatility. Attributes are real if they shape the species, and so they are essential. Here we see how attributes are real. I mean, the attribute of volatility, I mean, the design, it's something real that gives the attribute of a flying bird. And this is how we see the manifestation of the attributes of God. And this is very important because even if we cannot know, if we cannot have not even a simple idea of God because our intellect is limited and our perception is limited, we can only see its manifestation, or the manifestation of God. And this is the thinking of medieval literature, that we see the manifestation of God by means of the attributes. I know it's strange, it's tough. I know it's strange. I mean, we are not used to this language. We are not familiar with it. Even myself, I was not familiar with it when I started translating it, and I was really afraid because when you confront something that you are not used to, that it's not known, sometimes you're afraid and sometimes you reject it. And as a translator, I really have to come into terms with it and try to learn about it as fast as I could to be able to understand it and to write the notes and to translate. It's a commandment to meditate about God in this way as the Sephardics did it. And this is a millenary way of meditating. It's not new. And the teaching of attributes and perfections and all this language that might be strange to us, it's really something that was developed as a whole tradition and as a whole Sephardic tradition. And I think it's our mission to preserve this and to restore it, and not only to restore it. I know in papers, but to restore it in our thoughts, because it's very easy to get a book and to put it there, but to learn to think like these people back then, who had a different and maybe even distinct understanding of spirituality and of culture and of practicing Judaism is something that we need to learn, and I think it's important to restore it and to read. I mean, it's the only way.
Thank you so much for enlightening us with Orobio's ideas, deeply rooted, obviously, as we can see, in the Sephardic tradition, and really triggering our brain cells and getting us thinking in sort of Maimonidean philosophical terms. And it's worth studying. As you said, this is not something we just wanted to give a little taster. But to answer the question, you've got here of the famous historian of Heinrich Greit. He acquired the respectful admiration of his outstanding opponents of Judaism. So I assume, obviously, the defenders would also have, appreciated him by his integrity and sharp dialectics. And Chacham Faur speaks about him a lot in his book, The Shadow of History, as well, which is about the conversos who came out of Spain and went to the different communities. And you have here a letter which is really interesting of Voltaire. Orobio was so learned that he gave none of the illusions that so many other rabbis are accused of. He was deep without being obscure. He stood out in literature, a man of a pleasant spirit and extreme politeness. And I think his matzeva, that what you showed right at the beginning, where it says he was famous around the world, I think all that gives a good understanding of the ambassador that he was.